Let me tell you guys a story. My name is Eric Williams, and I work as a political journalist down in Washington, D.C. My day-to-day involves covering Congress, tracking the president, and chasing down whatever topic happens to be blowing up on social media that afternoon. Now, I have a handful of inside sources I rely on, and honestly, they probably think I don't trust them enough. But as it turned out, the single most reliable source of information I ever found was actually my dog, Applejack's. To explain how that happened, I need to back up a bit. Around 3 years ago, I was walking out of my apartment complex to go follow up on a lead. As I stepped outside, I heard this sudden rustling coming from the thick bushes right next to the wide concrete steps by the front door. I just assumed it was the local raccoon messing around in the trash bins again, so I didn't think twice about it. Fast forward to about 11 p.m. that night when I finally got back. I was halfway up the outdoor stairs when this low, sad whimpering sound came out of the dark greenery. I stopped in my tracks, backed up a step, and stared into the shadows. That's when I caught the glint of 2 eyes staring straight back at me. Judging by the height, those eyes were a good 3 feet off the ground. I started to take a cautious step backward, but then I heard a very distinct, slow thump, thump, thump of a tail wagging against the dirt. "Hey there, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. I moved back down and sat down quietly right on the bottom concrete step. "Are you hungry?" I unzipped my backpack and started digging around at the very bottom. The only food I could find was an energy drink and a tiny single-serving box of Applejack cereal left over from breakfast. I popped the box open and placed it on the step right beside me. It took a couple of minutes of waiting, but slowly, a massive dog crept out of the undergrowth and cautiously moved toward the food. He was huge, but I could tell he wasn't even a year old yet. He was incredibly skinny, looking like he hadn't had a real meal in days. Keeping one watchful eye on me, he tentatively sniffed the cereal. Then his appetite completely took over, and he devoured the whole thing in seconds. He even used his nose to flip the cardboard box upside down to make sure he didn't miss a single piece. When he finished, he looked up at me. I stretched out my hand to let him get my scent, and then I slowly reached out and scratched him right behind his ears. His tail started going wild. He climbed right up onto the step next to me and sat down, leaning his heavy shoulder right against my side. And honestly, that was it. We've been a team ever since. For the next few weeks, I checked online forums, scanned local newspapers, and looked at neighborhood bulletin boards to see if anyone was missing a giant puppy.
In the evening,
eventually I stopped looking. It didn't take long for us to establish a daily routine.
The park we go to is basically the boundary line between a super wealthy neighborhood and the slightly rundown area where my apartment building sits. It's a massive place that stretches out for miles, featuring a winding river that runs straight through the middle of it. There is more than enough space for him to sprint after a tennis ball or wrestle with other dogs. But I noticed pretty early on that Jax had absolutely no interest in other canines. He wasn't mean or aggressive at all. He just completely pretended they didn't exist. Other dogs would trot up to him with their tails wagging, totally ready to play. But Jax would keep his eyes locked solely on me. Now, along that river, there are several historic stone bridges, and Jax absolutely loved sprinting down them at top speed. He'd race across to the other side, pivot on a dime, and sprint right back to my side. We did this exact ritual at every single bridge we crossed. I would stand there cracking up, yelling for him to come back in this overly dramatic voice like it was a total emergency. Sometimes he'd run a little too fast to hit the brakes in time, plowing straight into my legs and sending us both tumbling onto the grass. But then came this one specific Tuesday evening. We were at the park, and Jax dashed across one of the bridges, but instead of turning around, he stopped on the far side. He stood completely still, staring intently into the thick woods ahead. He cast a quick glance back at me, almost like he was trying to signal something, and then he bolted straight into the trees. I screamed his name, but he didn't slow down. By the time I managed to sprint across the bridge myself, all I could see through the trees was a man kneeling down over something on the dirt. I ran as fast as I could. "Hey, is everything okay?" I shouted as I got closer. As I approached, I could see the man had actual tears in his eyes. A golden retriever was laying flat on the ground in front of him, and Jax had already laid down right next to it, resting his heavy head directly across the other dog's chest. "Did my dog attack yours?" I asked, suddenly panicked. No, the man choked out, shaking his head. Honestly, I think he just saved him. My dog was having a massive seizure. Usually they pass pretty quickly if I can get him to calm down, but this one just wouldn't stop.
Yeah, I can carry him.
It didn't break until your dog came over and
We
laid
just
down
live
right
right up
against
there.
him. It's like he
pointed
totally
toward a
soothed
massive
him.
mansion sitting up
Are
on
you
the
going to be
hillside.
able to get him back home?
I should
asked.
probably get him inside. Thank you so much. Roughly a week later, the exact same guy with the golden retriever spotted us across the park. He gave us a big wave and walked right over with his dog. It turned out he had actually been actively searching for us. As we talked, I found out his name was Gregory Williams, and as it turned out, he had just been elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. I remember thinking on the walk home that I was definitely buying Jax a triple cheeseburger, maybe even 2. From that day forward, Gregory and I met up at the park every single Tuesday, and we ended up becoming great friends. The 2 dogs would happily play together while we chatted about life, and every once in a while he would give me an insider heads up on a political story he knew I was tracking. Of course, I was always incredibly careful to never mention his name in my reporting. Several months flew by, and the first Tuesday of December finally arrived. We met up at our usual spot in the park. While the dogs were running around, Gregory mentioned that he was heading out early for the winter congressional break to take his family up to a remote cabin in Colorado. He immediately invited me to tag along and told me to bring Jax, obviously. I told him it sounded incredible, but there was no way I could get that much time off for my editor. Gregory just smiled and said, "Trust me, absolutely nothing is going to be happening in DC until well after the holidays." He reached out, took my phone, and typed a new number into my contacts. "That's the direct landline to the mountain cabin. Get out of the city as fast as you can. Just drive up toward Colorado Springs and give me a call from the road. I'll give you directions to the place from there. Just make sure you bring Jax, and honestly, bring anyone else you want. I really mean it, come up. My wife and kids are dying to meet the dog who saved ours. And you too." I just laughed. "All right, I'll definitely see what I can do." Gregory looked at me, went quiet for a second, and then said, "If you can make it out there by the 15th of December, I promise I'll hand you the absolute story of a lifetime." He gave me a firm nod, turned around, and walked off into the park with his dog following close behind. I just stood there on the path, completely silent, watching him disappear into the distance. Back at my place later that night, I scooped some kibble into Jax's bowl and threw some random leftovers into the microwave for myself. on my laptop to finalize
I had a
my
major
talking
interview
points.
lined up for the next morning
flipped
with
the local
Senator
news
Susan
channel on in
Collins,
the background
who serves
while I
as the
typed
chair
away.
of the Housing and
The
Urban
broadcast
Development.
went through the usual local updates, a couple of neighborhood shootings, a robbery down the street, and a story about a missing 10-year-old kid who had thankfully been found totally safe at a local Walmart. Then, the weather anchor mentioned that skywatchers were going to get a massive show in about 2 weeks when a massive comet made its closest approach to Earth on December 16th. By the time I shut down my computer and headed to bed, Jax was already sound asleep on the floor. The next morning, I woke up to the quiet chirp of a text notification on my phone. It was a message from the senator's personal secretary, completely canceling our interview for the day. I immediately called the office line to try and get it rescheduled, but I was hit with an automated voicemail stating that the senator's entire office was already shut down for the holiday break. Since my entire morning was suddenly wide open, I took Jax out for a really long, lazy walk, and then I caught the metro train down to the Capitol building. I walked over toward the congressional offices to see if I could bounce around and dig up any gossip regarding an upcoming legislative vote. The security guard at the entrance checked my press credentials and gave me a nod. I walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway toward the elevators and took one up to the 4th floor. When the doors opened, I stepped out, turned right, and stopped dead in my tracks. Ahead of me stretched an incredibly long hallway. There had to be at least 20 different congressional offices down that corridor, and every single door was firmly shut with the lights turned completely off. It was incredibly eerie. I got right back into the elevator and started stopping at every single floor to look around. The entire building was completely deserted. This kind of thing literally never happens. There are always hundreds of congressional staffers rushing around those halls, no matter what time of year it is. On my way out past the security desk, I asked the guard on duty what was going on. He just gave me a blank shrug and said, "No clue, man." I bought a coffee from a street cart outside and sat down on a stone bench that looked out over the main pedestrian plaza. Pulling out my phone, I started dialing through my master list of political contacts one by one.
Every single call went straight to voicemail or returned an automated message. "I'm sorry, but our offices are currently closed for the holiday season." But Congress was explicitly scheduled to be in session working until December 21st.
Only half
Major
paying
votes were
attention
on the
to
calendar
groups
for
of
every single
tourists
day.
walking past me.
An empty building just
A
didn't make
family
any
with
sense.
2 young kids came over and sat down on the bench right next to mine. "Are we actually going to be able to see it, Dad?" one of the kids asked. "Oh yeah," their father replied. "Honestly, you probably won't even need a telescope to spot it." Suddenly, this terrifying mental image flashed through my mind. Thousands of families gathering outside with lawn chairs and binoculars, throwing comet-watching darties, completely unaware of a silent disaster hurtling straight toward them. I threw my coffee straight into a trash can and sprinted for the train station. When I got back to the apartment, I took Jax out for a super fast bathroom break, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I didn't even know what keywords to start typing into the search bar. Impact. No, that didn't make sense. There are way too many amateur astronomers out there in the world. If a catastrophic collision was locked in, the public would have found out about it weeks ago. I spent the next week and a half digging through the internet and found absolutely nothing. The mainstream news was completely filled with nothing but excitement over how clearly visible the comet was getting. I even started digging into deep conspiracy theory forums, but there was nothing out of the ordinary there either. It was around 11 p.m. on a frantic night when it finally clicked. I realized I needed to stop searching the present and start looking into the past. I typed "historical impact of comets" into the search engine. As I started reading, the pieces began falling into place. Comets shed massive amounts of debris fields, and those fragments can hit the atmosphere. They can trigger massive atmospheric airbursts, instantly catching entire forests on fire. But even worse, they can create a massive high-altitude blanket of toxic dust particles in the air. I read about how a comet was directly tied to the Justinian Plague back in 541 AD, the first real recorded outbreak of the Black Death in Europe, where entire cities literally couldn't clear the bodies from the streets fast enough. Then there was the Great Plague of 1347, which also lined up with a major comet. And during the winter of 1664, a massive, brilliant comet was recorded in the skies right over London. The Great Plague absolutely tore through England for the next 2 straight years. I stopped scrolling and closed the tab. I suddenly realized that if something catastrophic was heading our way, Washington, D.C. was the absolute last place on Earth I wanted to be standing. My watch read 12:15 a.m. It was officially the early morning hours of December 15th. If I packed my bags, threw everything into the trunk right now, and drove straight through the night without stopping all the way to Colorado Springs, we might actually make it in time. I looked over across the living room at my dog. "Hey, Jax, you want to go for a ride?"